And I look forward to the full commission's comments as we move forward.
Commissioner Oseguera.
You reported in minutes as 95% yes.
So Commissioner Lapis is yes or 95% yes? Yes. Commissioner
I'm
Oseguera.
at like 92.
Commissioner Oseguera.
Approved to move forward to the full commission for discussion.
Commissioner Valle.
Yes.
Okay, very good. It looks like we have a solid consent and approval to move forward to the entire commission. I'll let Chair Sanborn know that we have met our first deadline. So thank you and congratulations to everybody for all the work on this. Okay, Kate, go to the next slide, probably move 2 slides forward. Next one. Next. Go to the next. The design. Go to the next slide because the design for recyclability we are going to have to address at the next meeting, where we will have more time. Just like to keep on schedule because the next subject that we're going to be talking about is item 5, discussion of the bottle bill, problems and solutions. We're going to have about a 20-minute presentation and discussion by Susan Collins with the Container Recycling Institute. We brought her back from a prior meeting for some additional information, but Susan Collins is a national leader in bottle bills. Her organization tracks bottle bills, best management practices, and recovery systems throughout the country. So she's very knowledgeable, and she's very knowledgeable in the California program as well. And then after her presentation, we will start talking about some of the problems and potential solutions in the California program. So with that, I'd like to welcome Susan Collins.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Kate, can we switch to my slide? Thank you very much. You can skip over this first one. Thank you for the introduction, Jeff, and good afternoon to all the commissioners. If somebody could give me a thumbs up, is my audio okay? Great, thank you. So last time I had this list of recommendations that I presented as the first slide. This is basically the same list, but I have added 2 bullets, and I want to point those out. The other thing I've done is that I've sort of prioritized this list from top to bottom. Some issues are bigger than others, and so they need to be pursued first. Some, and it's more important to pursue them. And then also there's a sequencing issue where some issues should be pursued before others. So the very first bullet I have is a reflection of not only my 10 years worth of frustration, but I think a lot of people's years worth of frustration with this program is that as many times as we've talked about the same persistent problems over and over, not only have the problems failed to be corrected, but for the most part, they've gotten worse and worse over time, and new problems have been added on. The program has been so neglected, so devoid of leadership, that it has just sunk deeper and deeper into more and more problems. And something needs to be done to shake that up, to bring new leadership on board and really focus on the solutions. We've seen that when CalRecycle is asked to focus on the program, it seems to go in fits and starts, and CalRecycle has sometimes been pulled away to work on other things, like management of the disaster debris from the fires, was something that took a lot of the agency's time and took time away from some of the work that they were doing on the beverage container program. So in recognizing that those kinds of things then can happen, what I would recommend in the very first bullet is that there either be an external agency that's tasked with oversight, or that it happen like at the level of Cal EPA or within the governor's office, and that it be a person or a team of people who are focused on prioritizing the problems with the program, creating a strategic plan to solve the problems, and then they just stay on the problems and work on resolving them one by one, and go through the whole list and get it done and have real accountability, external accountability, so that it once and for all we can fix these problems. So that's what the first bullet is all about. The other bullets, the other single bullet that I forgot to include last time was the third bullet down. I forgot to mention that the retailers don't have a way to get paid right now when they take back containers in store. And that's just an incredible oversight. They don't even have a way to get the deposit refunded to them. And I don't think anybody intended for that to happen, but it's a gaping hole in the statute. So I wanted to point that out, that I've added it to the list. The rest of these things are all on the list. They're the same as last time, but I did put them in sequence order. We wouldn't want to do something like the very bottom of the list, increase the deposit refund to 10 cents or add wine and spirits, while we are still in this situation of having these huge recycling deserts in the state, or redemption deserts, because that would really just add insult to injury. It would be assigning new deposits to people or increasing the amount of deposit they have to pay, while they have absolutely no chance of getting their refunds back because they don't have any refund infrastructure in their area. So we would want to do those kinds of things last, after we've improved the structural infrastructure issues and have made it so that everybody who wants to get their refund can get their refund in a convenient way. So let's move on to the next slide. So for the next one, we talked about this last time. This slide didn't translate well, so we may be seeing these kinds of font issues in the next couple of slides. But we talked about this last time. I won't belabor the point here. I only left this slide in to bring up the point again that the redemption centers typically take in about 88% of the material in the system. The curbside and drop-off programs take in about 12% of the materials, yet the group that takes in the smaller portion, curbside and drop-off, which takes in 12% of the material, receives payments that are greater than the redemption centers, which take in the other 88% of the material. So it's that lopsided nature of the payment that I wanted to bring up again. And I wanted to mention how that creates some perverse incentives, and how there are perverse incentives all the way through the program. The short payments to the redemption centers means that we have the least glamorous redemption system in the world. That's the nicest, most polite term I can use to describe what our redemption centers are like in the state, and what our consumer experience is like in these centers compared to the rest of the world. And of course, the sites have been going out of business in the last 6 years. We've lost 50% of them. They've gone out of business. So while we've been underpaying one group, we've been overpaying the curbside and drop-off systems, which reduces their incentive to clean out contamination. It means also, again, another perverse incentive that a curbside program can get paid more if they close an existing redemption center that they own. And we've seen this happen in a number of places where in a community, it was the same entity that owned both the redemption center and the curbside program, and they shut the recycling center, and that meant that all of the containers sort of shifted over into the curbside program, taking away the deposits from the people that were supposed to be able to get them back. We've also got perverse incentives when it comes to the retailers, because they're not paid at all to take back the containers. And there's a very low level of enforcement on the retailers in the program to make sure that they do take back containers. And a number of reports have documented that. We've also got another perverse incentive in the program, which is that manufacturers actually pay more money into the system as the recycling rate goes down, but they have no control over the recycling infrastructure. We've seen this. Yes.
Susan, if I could interrupt, are you talking on this slide or is it one in the future?
These are general things about the perverse incentives.
Okay.
So don't worry, I'll get to other things on the other slides, but thank you for asking, Jeff. So with the manufacturers of glass containers, as the system has gotten more difficult, as more redemption centers have closed, the economics of the system have changed, and the glass manufacturers have had to pay more money into the system at the same time that they are getting less glass out of the system that they can use to recycle their own products. They pay more to get less. So that's another one of those perverse incentives that ideally would be corrected in this program. Okay, so Chair Don Levy had asked me to talk about overall system finances. That's the next slide, and you can skip on then to the next one after that as well. So just in general, the California Beverage Container Recycling Fund brings in annual revenues of about $1.4 billion. That's an updated number for this most recent fiscal year. And it recycles about 1 million tons per year of material. And the promise of this program is that we can recycle huge quantities of material at very, very high quality, and we can use it all in a closed loop system to reduce greenhouse gases, reduce the production of toxics, create jobs, and just generally have a cleaner environment and less litter. That's the promise of the program if we're doing it right. Next slide. It's also a huge program where 2 out of every 11 beverage containers that are recycled in the United States are recycled in California. Next slide. So this was another request that we talk about the general income versus outflow of, so this is revenue and expenditures of the program. And it's a complicated program, so even the things on this slide that I've tried to make simple, there are still complexities that aren't fully captured on this slide. But in general, the income comes from deposits and processing fees, as well as a little bit of interest and penalties. The other funding that's off the books is the scrap revenue. It's never recognized as a CalRecycle line item, but it does help fund the program. On the outflow side, the return of the refund return of the deposit is the largest item. It's more than $1 billion. And that's actually gone down a little bit over the last few years as the redemption rate and recycling rate have gone down. The payments to recyclers include the handling fees at about $46 million. The processing payments is really the biggest set of payments to redemption centers and curbside programs at $134 million. And the administrative fees are about $25 million. We've also got the glass quality incentive payment, the plastic market development payment, and program administration. It's on the books on the fact sheet that just came out the other day is $59 million, but every year that number is shown as something like $59 million, but it really ends up being about $50 million when all the books are closed. There are also payments to the cities and counties of about $10 million. Public education hasn't been spent in many years, but this year $5 million is going to be spent out of the Beverage Container Fund because there's a new contract to do a public education project within CalRecycle. So this next item is one that most people don't really know about, is that the distributors receive administrative fees. They're deducted directly from the CRV that they pay into the program, and that's about $21 million. So that amount pretty much offsets the processing fees over on the left side that are paid by distributors and manufacturers. So on a grand scale, the beverage producers are receiving almost as much in fees as they're paying into the system in fees. Those two items pretty much zero each other out. So there isn't really a contribution to speak of coming from the beverage distributors and manufacturers. And these numbers came from the fact sheet and the monthly volume report, both of which were just released this week by CalRecycle. These are new numbers. Moving on to the next slide. And I know that a lot of that is pretty complicated. This is just showing us that the majority of revenues are really coming from the redemption fees that are paid into the system. There's a little bit in processing fees and other income and penalty assessments, but it's really not very much. Next slide. This is a big issue that we wrote a report about back in 2014. Our estimates show that about $200 million is not being collected in CRV fees because for whatever reason, the distributors and manufacturers aren't fully paying into the system. CalRecycle does conduct audits. In the most recent year, there was 5.7 million found in underpaid or unpaid CRV revenue, but the amount of companies that are audited is minuscule. It's like 1% every year. And if it was a meaningful number, if it was more like 10%, we could really get the fund into good shape and make it so that there weren't so many free riders in the system. This is about 1 out of every 5 or 1 out of every $6 is paid into this, or is not paid into the system that should be. So it's a lot of money every year, and this should really be corrected with a proper auditing program that's complete enough to get most of the proper payments paid into the fund. Next slide. This is just showing the expenditures that I talked about a minute ago in a pie chart. And again, most of it is those big payments of the what's called CRV out. It's the refund of the deposit either to people directly or indirectly paid to the curbside and drop-off programs. The rest of it really, that combined with the processing payments and the handling fees. And the other items that are paid out are really a much, much smaller piece of the expenditures in the fund. Next slide. We've only got 2 slides left. So this is a repeat of a slide that I created back in 2016 using 2013 data. And I didn't update it because it takes a lot of work to gather the data, like weeks worth of work to get these numbers exactly right. But I knew that I didn't really need to update this slide with correct numbers for 2020 because it really hasn't changed that much over time. I've been sort of doing these numbers year after year for about 10 years. And the basic relationships that sit on this page are about the same. Because of the fact that the curbside programs and the drop-off programs get to keep the deposit, and because the curbside programs also get the curbside supplemental payment, the total revenue per container that those programs receive is much, much larger than what the redemption centers receive, because the redemption centers receive the deposit refund, but then they pay it back out to the consumers immediately. It's just a pass-through. So on to the next slide. The other thing that's really important in this program is the quality of materials. These are 2 piles of materials that we photographed at the same facility on the same day. The one on the left is bottles from redemption centers, and the one on the right is glass from a curbside program. And to be fair, it does look like it's all paper. It's not. The paper really floats to the top, but you really can't see the glass in a lot of the curbside loads. You can hear it if you run something through the load, but it takes a lot of effort and a lot of cost to clean the contaminants out of the material that's on the right. And this is one example of the difference in quality between curbside material and material that goes through the redemption centers. And I think if the curbside programs are being paid so generously for the material that they handle, that they should also be cleaning the material to the standards that are expected of a truly closed loop recycling program. And those are all the slides that I have. I hope that addresses some of the questions that were posed to me before I put together this presentation. Thank you all.
Susan, thank you. Very helpful. I know it's going to add to the conversation with things. Got a few questions from the commissioners, but first, with the complexity of the California program, where's California on the scale of complexity compared to other bottle bills in the country?
Well, all of the bottle bills in the country and in the world have to deal with the same sorts of things. They have to have, if they have redemption centers, some of them don't. They just have return to retail, but they all have to, they have to have, redemption centers. Some of them don't. They just have return to retail, but they all have to, they have to have redemption centers. Some of them don't. They just have return to retail, but they all have to, they have redemption centers. Some of them don't. They just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to, they just have return to retail, but they all have to handle the materials. They have to charge refunds to consumers or charge deposits to consumers, have a way to get the refunds back to the consumers. I would say that California's program makes it more complex and less efficient and less effective all at the same time.
Okay. And when you talked about the outflows, the budget for Cal Recycle for the Division of Recycling, any idea what that is? Is it 5%? Are they limited? What's their budget?
It is limited, I believe, by statute. I haven't looked at that in a long time. I think it's statute that limits it to 5%, which is how that number gets generated. From year to year, the amount that actually gets spent, as I mentioned, always ends up being lower than what's in the budget, having tracked it for 10 years. But I do have a question of Cal Recycle about what the expenditures are on the item called distributed administration. So I think there's a chunk of the money, a large chunk, that's not actually being used to run the container deposit program, but that's something I need to clarify with Cal Recycle.
Okay. And then with the last meeting and then with this one, when we talk about the payments to the curbside programs, I think there's a number in there that might be a little misleading, and it's a profit number. The difference between what the curbside programs are getting versus the costs. I don't think that the curbside operators are at, a 300-400% profit, because if that was truly the case, you'd have a lot of people wanting to get into the curbside processing business. I just think that Cal Recycle is not capturing all the costs of collection in, transportation out, facility costs. It just seems like that number is, it's helping the collection program and offsetting the costs for the residents and the consumers. I just don't think it's truly a profit number for the curbside programs, because they run through.
Actually, I can comment on that, and it's sort of the opposite. So the approach I took was a typical cost accounting approach. So and again, there's an entire report that discusses this methodology, and it includes all of the numbers and all of the sources for the data. So what that was looking at was just the revenues and expenditures associated with handling beverage containers in curbside programs. It doesn't say anything about the profitability of curbside programs overall, nor does it say anything about the profitability of any specific curbside program in the state of California. So I looked at typical costs by material type to handle those materials all the way from the point where a consumer puts the material into their container, their curbside bin, all the way to the point where it gets handled through the entire collection process and the entire sorting and processing process, and being marketed, and the revenue is received. So it's an all-in number using the data from, that is an all-in number kind of data from Ontario, Canada. And that's how I came up with expenses for those materials of about $43 million. That is a far more generous assumption than the recent Cal Recycle study, which estimated the costs of merely processing and sorting, the processing sorting piece of those containers. Cal Recycle estimated at only $8 million. So if I had used Cal Recycle's study number, I would have used 8 million instead of 43 million. And I don't think that's correct at all, because there is a collection phase of the materials, as well as the sorting phase, where the material gets to a material recovery fit and has to be sorted out. So that's how it was calculated. The revenues are just the revenues from beverage containers. The costs are just the costs of beverage containers, not all of the material type. And the difference is just calculated.
Okay. If you could go back to your suggestion slide and leave it on that. We do have several commissioners that have some comments or questions. We'll start with Commissioner Valle, then go on to Commissioner Lapis, Commissioner Oseguera, and then Commissioner Kaplikov. So Commissioner Valle.
Thank you, Chair. Susan, on the statewide averaging, for example, in the Bay Area, the cost of labor, the cost of living is much different than in Fresno and other parts of the state. How does Cal Recycle account for the different costs with regard to the those urban areas versus rural areas, et cetera?
Right. So thank you for your question. I assume this is the study you're asking about, the study that they do when they put together the processing fee study and handling fee study.
Right.
And they do look at labor costs and all sorts of costs, everything that would be in your profit and loss statement, including depreciation and amortization and fuel and utilities and labor costs, everything. And they do that choosing a randomly selected number of sites throughout the state. And they also do stratification where they look at large, medium, and small sites. So within the large group, they pick a certain number of sites. Within the small group, they pick a certain number of sites. And they just go out to those sites and collect all of the information that would go into your normal profit and loss statement. And so it's all averaged together. I don't know how rigorous they are about making sure that there's geographic distribution. I don't think I've read about that in their report. If it's random, then you would think that there would also be a fair distribution geographically as well. But the biggest thing that we know about labor, you're talking about labor being different in different areas, which is certainly the case. But the biggest thing that is missed when it comes to labor is that with the recent increases in minimum wage, those have not been captured in these cost surveys until 2 years later, because the cost surveys are always 2 years in arrears. So they're always looking at, let's say 2016 minimum wage is part of the wage pool when they're doing the study and finalizing the study in 2018, and those results are used into 2019. And there isn't enough of a cost increase with the consumer price index to make up for that difference. So wages are definitely an underrepresented cost item.
So what would be a recommendation on how to keep those recommendations timely so that they're more in line with current operating cost? Is there a simple remedy for that? Or do we have to wait for the analysis to take 2 years?
Well, they could use a completely different approach and go more to a public utility approach where you're not only gathering information, but you're taking any available information that you have to accurately forecast what's going to happen. So in that case, they could do a study and everybody already knows what the statute says about what the minimum wage is going to go up to. So they could, during the process of the study, they could say, okay, here's the information we have on what the costs are today. But we all have very clear knowledge that minimum wages are going to increase by a certain percentage. We should take that into account, and we should take that portion of the cost and put in these cost projections for where wages would go, and use that as a cost prediction rather than using cost values that are in arrears. And that's the way it's usually done for utilities.
If you recall, several years ago, California used to do training for redemption centers, recycling centers. They would come out on site or you had the option of sending staff to trainings at collective training centers. I think Cal Recycle has cut that out. Given surplus funds, would it be prudent to use some of those funds? For example, our center has been fined for taking non-redemption material in very small quantities. I'm talking about just a few non-CRV material, but we have in excess of 300 customers a day, youth workers aged 14 to 24 working. It's hard to stay on the issue. It's not as if we're committing deliberate fraud, but Cal Recycle's fines are $1,000, and we've paid that several times. Then you run the risk that if you don't pay the fine and you want to appeal it, which we tried to do, you wind up having to pay for the legal cost when you lose your case, and going in, it's a loser. Do you see a different methodology that can educate redemption centers, recycling centers? We get high turnover of staff. It's difficult to, at the same time, educate the customer about what's recyclable and what isn't. Is there a better method that works somewhere else?
Yeah, these kinds of fines are something I've never seen in any program anywhere. And what you just said, the $1,000 fine for having tiny amounts of materials, I've often talked about this as showing up for work 5 minutes late and your pay gets docked for a whole week. There's a lack of proportionality here. The fines are hugely out of proportion, especially when handling fee sites get docked for their entire handling fee for the whole month. And at the same time, it isn't a universal philosophy throughout the program that when retailers make mistakes, and they do at a rate that I think is more than 50% according to the latest fact sheet, based on the number of retailers that are inspected, there aren't those kinds of fines. They aren't in that sort of number. And when retailers or beverage manufacturers have a problem where they make some mistakes and they don't pay into the system, like the Walmart case where they failed to pay in $14.5 million until they were audited, they paid a fine of zero. There was no fine. There was no penalty. And so that's, again, the penalty and fine philosophy is not universal throughout the entire system. And I want to mention something that I didn't mention in my previous answer. I talked about using a utility forecasting method to come up with the amounts that the redemption centers should be paid. Two other things is that there's never been a true up at the end of the year. So if it's found that redemption centers are underpaid for a year due to changing circumstances, nobody goes back and corrects that system by doing a true up at the end of the year. The other way to handle this would be to do what Hawaii did and just come up with a standard new formula that doesn't depend on the volatility of scrap prices, and just establish what the handling fees would be per container and just pay those, and not worry about scrap prices. That's working in Hawaii right now.
Okay, good. Susan, thank you. And Richard, one of the items that she has up there is to revamp the formula to recycling centers to ensure profitability. I think that's what she's addressing, because one of the concerns is recycling centers have closed. More material has gone through the remaining recycling centers, and CalRecycle looks at the cost based on the units going through there. And the concern that I have is you might be the busiest recycling center in the state. You might be the only recycling center in a city of 900,000 people on the Bay, and you might be showing that you're the lowest cost operator in the state because you're putting through the most containers. But there's a problem with the formula, because if they're showing low cost, it's not making sense, because nobody else is trying to open up recycling centers where there's only one recycling center in a city of 900,000 people. So there's definitely a flaw with the program and how the formulas work and how they get paid, because the areas with the fewest recycling centers are probably taking in the highest volume, and they're probably showing the lowest cost. But it's in an area where we all know, the Bay Area, there's very few recycling centers, and nobody's going into those markets because the costs are so high. So I think Susan's addressing it with changing the formula. Okay, we got to move on. Commissioner Lapis.
Hey, thanks. And thanks, Susan, for the presentation. Our organization has definitely worked on a lot of these issues over the years, and definitely acknowledge there's some improvements to the bottleable system that we can suggest. I'm a little concerned about getting into this level of detail for a commission that's really supposed to be issuing broad-scale policy recommendations for, for legislators and policymakers to kind of work out the details on. So I think we should kind of simplify it into a few things, like maybe say, increase funding for the existing recycling centers, or switch to, a tiered volume system, create some kind of incentive for the recycling deserts. I love that term, Susan. That's a great term. So create some kind of incentive for the recycling deserts to site recycling centers, and the bag drops. That's another great thing we should be supporting. And then in terms of expanding the program, I believe you're all aware that we're strongly supportive of expanding the program. One way we could do this recommendation is tie it to the recyclability of a product. So both adding to the program and increasing to 10 cents should maybe apply to products that don't hit a certain recycling rate, which would give the manufacturers motivation to try to hit it on their own. So there are kind of like 4 things that jumped out at me, but there might be some others. I did also want to mention on the curbside. I think I've had this conversation with Susan before, but it's sort of an apples and orange comparison. I don't think it's a really fair comparison to put that really high number up, because there's so much other costs, so many other costs that are borne by those operators. I mean, they don't get to be picky about what they take. It's whatever's in the bin. And like a third or less, I think, of the glass that they get is CRV. And they still have to deal with the rest of it, and it's a negative cost item. And there are a lot of things like that, and I just don't feel like that's a fair comparison to put them on one chart where their number is way higher. They're an important part of the system too.
Nick, thank you. And as far as increasing the deposit and tying it to recyclability, I have a slide for you coming up that will address that. So we'll get there. Commissioner Oseguera.
Yeah, I want to completely, support the comments made by Nick Lapis. I believe that redemption centers and curbside programs need to be healthy, both of them. Shifting funds to harm one program versus another would be poor public policy. And especially I'm concerned in an environment where we have increasing costs and significant reduction in values, that there's the comment that there should be a shifting of funds, which I completely disagree with. I also want to make sure when we show photos to the public, we should be showing photos of the success stories and also the areas of opportunity. I can tell you there's many facilities across the state of California currently baling wonderful bales, shipping them to markets, and that are turning to different products. And I do believe it's misleading and unfair to pick out certain portions of curbside collection and recycling and not show the great picture of how it benefits recycling throughout the state. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Oseguera, thank you. And Commissioner Koplikov.
Thank you, Chair. John Levy. I echo those past 2 commissioners' comments on the profitability of the curbside program, and I challenge it as well, but we'll leave it there. I like the first point of the external oversight, kind of a committee or prioritized plan of correction. I think there's, but I'd like to expand that a little bit more. If there's going to be an oversight committee or a board or whatever it is, that it looks at all the programs, not just the CRV, the bottle bill. I could definitely take a look at that and see how CalRecycle's grown. They're an extremely large department, and they have their their hands in the entire recycling markets in California, including organics, and so that's something that I'd like to have a discussion on down the road. But you look at wine and spirits, and that is 70% or 65% of the glass coming through a curbside program. and to show the 200% profitability on glass, CRV is probably not an accurate statement. So adding wine and spirits or having them join the program at some point in some way is going to be extremely important for the glass manufacturers in California as well. So I'm supportive of that, and I appreciate Susan your slideshow today. And again, I would echo the comments of Commissioner Oseguera on the MRFs and the success stories and technology that's going through these MRFs with optical sorters that can definitely get a precise bail of less than 0.5% of contamination in there. So thank you, and those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Kalpikoff. Yeah, the thought of an external oversight committee, I mean, that's something that's definitely interesting because like Commissioner Lapis said, we're going to want to keep this high level somehow, but it's tough not to get down into the weeds because the program for years and years has not addressed the specifics. So how do we do that? You know, the oversight committee, that's something that's definitely intriguing, and I think we should be looking at that. Some people have talked about a stewardship organization, and at our next meeting, we're going to hear a little bit more about that from the people from Oregon, how that might work in California, but the big concern is California's 40 million people and Oregon is about 4 million people. And I think the staff at CalRecycle does a very good job, but I think they've been constrained by staffing and budgets, so they can't do everything that they would like. So maybe that oversight group could be a good recommendation coming out of our committee at some point, and then could address Commissioner Valle's enforcement issues or training issues out there. Commissioner Oseguera, did you want to jump back in?
No, I think I clarified, where I thought this presentation needed to be clarified. It does for me, Chairperson Dunleavy, it raises more questions than actually for me than it answered. So I know you said it answered a lot of questions. I think it creates more uncertainty, and I personally believe that it's misleading and unfair as it relates to curbside collection.
Okay, point well taken. It's something that we do have to figure out because it isn't something that we do want to shift funds from one to the other. We have to find the right solution on how we can provide the convenience and get redemption opportunities. And I think it's getting down to the formula and the ability for CalRecycle or somebody to make those decisions to change how recycling centers get paid. So,
Chair Donlevy?
Yes.
Susan, I realized that I mentioned the fact that there was, I think it's a 7 or 8 page study that figured out the costs that are paid to the curbside and drop-off programs, but I haven't, the last time I presented this, I didn't present that entire study, nor did I provide it to the entire committee, so I can send that in so that the entire committee can read the entire study.
That would be helpful. And then Audrey, we have 2 public comments, and then if you have the ability to switch back over to my slides.
Yes, I can go ahead and do these. The public comments are from agenda item number 4, sorry. One is from Kimberly Sheebley, a consultant. More and more aluminum cans are being covered in plastic shrink wrap. Does this affect their recyclability? It is stated that the shrink wrap must be removed from plastic bottles, but there's no mention of its removal from aluminum cans. And then from Tim Shestek of American Chemistry Council, I'd like to raise a concern over how the committee is conducting its business. The committee received several public comments on agenda item number 4, including a comment questioning the accuracy of the information relative to aerosol cans. There is zero discussion by the committee or even an acknowledgement that perhaps some of these issues raised by the public are worthy of further discussion. If stakeholders offer public comments, then the committee and the full commission should take the time to review, discuss, and respond in some manner to all of these comments, and both of these have been published onto the public comment site.
Okay, thank you for the comments. All right, if you could switch over to the next slide. Okay, Commissioner Lapis had brought this up as far as increasing the deposit, and hopefully everybody can see that. Oh, I see Commissioner Valle waving his hands.
I'm sorry, I sent in my,
Oh, and I see Commissioner Ferrante, sorry.
I just wanted to say to the staff, correct me if I'm wrong, procedurally, on public comments, because the item is not on the agenda, if somebody submits a public comment, regardless of what the topic, we are not allowed to comment until it's on the agenda. Is that correct?
No, you are allowed to comment on comments that are made on specific agenda items like these. You're not allowed to make comments on the usually agenda item 2, comments not pertaining to agenda if folks have not specifically outlined what agenda item it will be read on when they're submitting them before. These that are coming in and pertain to your conversations within that agenda item, you can discuss. Correct me if I'm wrong, Pauline or Audrey, but you are allowed to comment on those within the agenda item relevant to the discussion at hand.
Okay,
and this is Paulina from CalRecycle. Just to quickly clarify, the commissioners and committee members were provided with a copy of Bagley-Keene, and so that outlines the restrictions of Bagley-Keene.
So getting back to the public comment that was made, it was critical of our not speaking on the issue. What was the context of that comment again, if you would mind going back to it again?
Sure.
Voting an agenda item or not?
I think it was in reference to those 11 comments I made on agenda item 4 pertaining to specific items like aerosol containers. There are other comments about PP recycling. Yeah.
So it would be appropriate for us to respond to those?
I think I don't think there's a problem with, yes, you can absolutely talk about them.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that as far as I'm concerned, anybody from any industry should be able to make a presentation, submit materials. I've read everything that everyone submitted in writing to date, so I'm up to speed on that stuff. So I encourage you to keep doing that. Thank you.
And as I had mentioned earlier, the comments that we had received from several stakeholders that as time permits in the future, we can invite them to future meetings to hear about their products and how they can support the recycling programs of their materials in California. So we look forward to those discussions in the future. I do see comments from Commissioner Ferrante and Commissioner Bouchard.
Yeah, and Jeff, with the comments, didn't you also say that you were going to reach out and schedule presentations on some of the public comments from the previous agenda item?
Yes, yeah. I did.
So I just wanted to reiterate some of the comments that were made just previously. And Susan, thank you for your presentation. And if you can make that underlying study available, I think that would be helpful, because I do believe, as a lot of the other commissioners have stated, that one slide was very oversimplified and might be misrepresenting what's actually going on. I think, as Alex pointed out, there are a lot of other costs and other factors that go into calculating curbside programs, and I understand what you're saying about just accounting for CRV materials within a program, but I wonder what the value is in that to begin with. So thanks, and I look forward to seeing that study.
Laura, thank you. Commissioner Bouchard.
Thank you. I just want to comment on this discussion around the curbside versus redemption centers. I understand the reasoning behind the desired shift to focusing on redemption centers because of the cleanliness of the product, but I really think that the general public is not going to go to redemption centers to recycle the material. I mean, I think it's a small percentage of the general public as it is that goes to redemption centers. And it's not because of recycling desert or redemption deserts. I mean, that's part of the problem, but in an area like San Mateo County, San Francisco, I mean, there are places, there are redemption centers that the public can go to, and they just don't. And that's because they like the convenience of the curbside program. And if we're going to shift funding or shift focus to these redemption centers, in my opinion, you're going to see a reduction in recycled material because people aren't going to do that. People are not going to go out of their way. The general public is not going to go out of their way to go to redemption centers. So you're going to see a reduction in participation in recycling programs as a result if that were the case. So I understand the concern and the desire to go, but we're hearing this from people that are very passionate about recycling, and the majority of the public is not, and they're not going to go out of their way to do that. So you know, some of the stakeholders we're hearing from who, you know, are in processing facilities for plastic, glass, aluminum, of course they want that, and I understand why, but I just think that's a pipe dream. So I think we need to focus on solutions on making the recycling, the curbside recycling more effective, because this idea to switch focus to redemption centers is just not, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's unrealistic. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your comments, and we'll get into that a little bit more, because one of the data requests that I had done from the first meeting was asked for redemption information or collection information from highly served areas and underserved areas. And when I get a chance to present the information, it shows that when there's convenient solutions, the amount of material going back to redemption centers is very high, and the amount going into the curbside programs is about half of what's going in the underserved areas. And I think there's a correlation with material quality in curbside programs when there's a lot of containers versus a normal amount. Because when the processing systems are supporting an area with no curbside or no redemption centers, the amount of glass and plastic in there is very difficult to sort. Sometimes the systems get overwhelmed, but again, the data that we got from CalRecycle will show that. And I agree with you. Going out of people's way, they won't do it. But when it's convenient, where it's near a store, they will take their material back. And that's where underserved areas like the Bay Area could use banks of reverse vending machines, bag drop programs, other things that's very convenient, where they could take their material, walk up to a machine, walk up to a bag drop location, drop off their material, and then go. They'll still use the curbside programs for the other items, and ultimately I think it'll generate higher quality material. But at a future meeting, we'll get into some of that information, because I think it helps when you see areas with a lot of redemption centers. I think there's a good relationship between the curbside programs. But we need to make sure the curbside programs are strong. And I think one of the first things we're doing is our recyclability list. And that's going to simplify the programs and help them hopefully get material out that's not recyclable and concentrate on what is recyclable and generate a higher quality material. No additional comments. I referenced this from Commissioner Lapis when he talked about increasing the deposit rate. And it's something that I think we should look at. Different ways you could do it is just increase the deposit for all containers. And then those that are recycled on an active basis, their deposit's going to go up, but they're really not doing anything wrong because everybody knows their item's recyclable. Or you could tie the deposit amount to those that are not achieving a certain recycling rate. And in our program, and this is data that CalRecycle published, it's showing that the aluminum can recycling rate is averaging about 82%. I think everybody, when they go to the store and they buy their favorite beverage, if it's an aluminum can, they're thinking that that is recyclable. And they're either going to take it to a recycling center or put it in their curbside container. When it goes down the sorting line, I have confidence that all the facilities are going to capture a high percentage of the aluminum cans. Nobody's going to miss it. Glass containers are averaging about a 67% recycling rate. The PET containers, they're averaging about a 75% recycling rate, and that's combined redemption and curbside. Your number 2 containers, about 68%. But once we get into the 3 through 7s and then the bimetal, when people are buying those items, it doesn't look like they're associating those items as recyclable or having a deposit, because the recycling rate for those is very low. And if we're talking about PP number 5, we've seen an uptick in the last 2 years, but on average for the last 2 years, it's only about 15% of the PP5 containers had been redeemed through either redemption centers or through the curbside programs. And that's an item that hopefully the manufacturers and the producers will come to the table with solutions on how to promote those as being recyclable and get those back to redemption centers, because those will be the stimulus for the highest quality material that will help the manufacturers site locations, hopefully in California, and they'll have a steady supply of high quality material. And then the next step would be adding material from the curbside programs. So one of the potential solutions, I think Nick was alluding to it, is possibly a policy coming from this committee that would recommend the deposit going from a nickel to a dime. And I would suggest setting an 80% recycling rate. So containers that achieve an 80% recycling rate would stay at a nickel. If they don't achieve the 80% recycling rate, then the deposit would go up. And we could do this over several years to hopefully get those brands on board to help promote their material as recyclable to go back to the redemption centers. So if we go to the next slide. From a timing standpoint, I think we have about 30 minutes more on this item. So I would just like to go through this, and then I'm going to open this up to the rest of the commission on what they think the biggest problems in the program are, and then we can start talking about solutions. It's been talked several times. The dealer take-back issue is a problem. The grocers aren't paid for the work that they're doing, and they can't even get their deposits back. I think CalRecycle talked about the convenience zones. Right now, they're at 0.5 miles or 3 miles in a rural area. I think that needs to be reviewed. Lack of innovation and higher cost options, such as the bag drop programs, the RVMs. There's no real good mechanism to pay for those higher and better services. So we need to figure that one out. And then the underserved areas, the recycling deserts, typically are higher cost areas, the Bay Area, west of the 405, South Orange County, places like that. Then we have overserved areas. And with the overserved areas, that might be a situation where what those areas are getting paid might be too much. We've heard from Western Strategic Glass, Paul Faraday, about the loss of quality glass and wine and spirits kind of being an issue because they've lost glass when we got rid of the commingled program. But Commissioner Kalkoff talked about 65% of the glass that they're receiving is wine and spirits. And when it goes through the MRFs, through the processing, there is a lot of loss on that. So there may be an opportunity with wine and spirits in the program to increase the recovery of quality glass and again, take the impact off the curbside programs because glass can do a lot of damage at a sorting facility with wear and tear on the belts, the conveyors, the balers. It's very abrasive. It's just sandpaper constantly going through the system. Low redemption rates, I just talked about that. With aluminum and PET, they seem to be pretty successful. Glass and number 2, they're doing okay, but I think we should look for a higher level from them. And then the 3 through 7, definitely below 25%. And then surplus funds, any funds from the Beverage Container Fund require legislative approval. And I think Commissioner Kalkoff and Ms. Collins addressed a possible solution with an oversight committee on that. So I think those are some of the problems that I hope our committee can start addressing solutions to. And at this point, I would just like to open it up to the commission or the committee on additional problems that we see out there that we'd like to try and address. So with that, Commissioner Dell. Commissioner Dell.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight, it was a slide back for, it said bottle, the whole chart with the bottle bill, the bottle recycling rates. Yeah, that's the collection rate. So actually, I'd also like to add something about, you know, actually what's a collected rate and then what's actually a recycled, because it's my understanding that if there's no market for these, it's actually we're paying to get them back, but then we're paying to dispose of them. So that word recycling, I believe, is not the correct word, and we should really differentiate between what's collected and then what's actually recycled.
Okay. I think that's something that we could look at. Commissioner Lapis.
Now, I thought Jan was actually saying something else, and I was going to make a very pedantic point about the 6-month numbers not necessarily always being useful. And especially in this case, I think the numbers are thrown off because of the pandemic. And our recovery actual rates are, the volume going through that we're recovering has stayed about the same. And so I think a 12-month fiscal year average is usually a little bit more accurate, but not a big deal.
Yeah, that's where I use the average of the last 2 years. Understandably that through COVID and all those issues, we have seen changes in the numbers. The report that Cal Recycle has out is showing that sales are up quite a bit, 5 to 8% with beverage sale increases. And then returns to recycling centers have been down, and the amount going through curbside programs has been up a little bit. But Cal Recycle does track it on an annual basis, and they go all the way back to 1990. If we want to get down to those details, we can see it. But I was just sharing this to bring up the discussion of looking at increasing the redemption based on the redemption rate by container type.
I'm going to interject here quickly to say the 4 short public comments we've gotten, and I'll say the timestamp on them too. Sorry, at 2:35 from John Cook with Niagara Bottling, we got To make deposit recovery / recycling centers more profitable, I would recommend changing statutes to allow for unmanned centers. And then at 241 from Randy Pollock, we got, on behalf of many of us who continue to listen in to the subcommittee and commission meetings and submit comments, will any of our comments be responded to, or are we wasting our time? At 248 from John Cook at Niagara Bottling, we got redemption centers collect 88% of CRV. In Oregon, the public use redemption centers collect close to 90%. If you want to move to curbside, then repeal the CRV. And then at 257 from Doug Kobold, we got the 3 through 7 values are likely low. This is in reference to this sheet, I believe, are likely low for 2 reasons. They represent a very small fraction of the overall CRV containers, and most MRFs do not segregate them out to be redeemed, mostly for the same reason. There's only a small fraction of them. The better alternative would be to ban them and have the beverage manufacturers choose from the 1s and 2s. There may have to be some off-ramps for very special cases, but most beverage manufacturers should be able to use the 1 and 2 containers. Those new public comments have been posted.
Okay, good, thank you. AB 793 I think is going to help because it puts the requirement on using post-consumer content for future beverage containers. Aluminum cans, not a problem. Glass, they're doing it, but plastic specifically, there is bottle-to-bottle technology for PET #1, and it looks like they are going to be able to hit the requirements under AB 793. They might have to stretch a little bit to get to 50%, but I think we have some of the best industries in the world, and I'm sure they'll be able to find a way to get to that. But for 2 through 7 plastic containers, I'm not aware of the technology to use post-consumer content in those containers. So there might be a natural progression, complements of AB 793, where a lot of these beverages in 2s through 7s might have to migrate into PET or aluminum. So that's with 793. And then I think if we were to make a recommendation to increase the deposit based on recyclability, that might provide an additional incentive for them to go into a container type that is more recyclable, such as aluminum or PET. So with the commissioners, any additional problems? I see Commissioner Kalpikoff with a question. So any additional items that we would like to try and address at future meetings on problems and potential solutions with the bottle bill? Commissioner Kalpikoff.
Yeah, thank you. Is there a study out there on regions, Jeff, that have higher redemption rates at buyback centers? And here's my question is I think John Bouchard had a pretty good point. How many people actually how many homes use a buyback center, and versus, and not even versus a curbside, just in buyback in general? Are there studies in different demographic areas such as San Francisco that has, the rents are $3,000 to $5,000 a month for a home? Are they going to save $4 worth of PET in their kitchen in a bag? Are they using those programs, the buyback centers, or Orange County? I mean, are there studies out there? Has anyone done one on where the buyback centers are used more, the volumes? Is there regional studies with that? That's something I'd like to look at, and because it goes hand in hand with doubling the deposits from 5 to 10 cents. Is that going to make a difference? Having $7 of PET in your kitchen and storing them for months on end to get that, is that gonna move the needle on it? That's kind of my question.
Okay. I don't know if Susan is still online, but I think we can find some studies on that. Just personal experience, when redemption opportunities are convenient, more people use them. Next meeting, we will hear from the people from Oregon Beverage, and I think they're in the mid-90s for a recycling rate. And they had indicated that when they went from a nickel to from a nickel per container to 10 cents per container, the number of people using their program went way, way up. They were, I think, in the low 80s, similar to California. But once they went from a nickel to a dime, they saw people that they just hadn't seen before. So I think we need to see some studies, but
no, and that comes from,
like,
well, real quick, then you can answer. I operated 2 buyback centers, and we recently shut them down because of competition in our area, at least the Central Valley. There's multiple buyback centers, and I think I saw some information on, population-wise, it's close to, 1 for every 20,000, where San Francisco's 1 for 900,000. So I get it, but the sheer volume coming in on curbside on buybacks in the Central Valley is a lot higher than other areas. And what's that due to, right? Is there something we can relate it to? And if we were to go up to 10 cents or look at that option, I just want to see what the results are. And I did understand the organs went up after they doubled the deposit. So go ahead, Susan. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, so the numbers in Oregon, back in 2016, they were at 64%, and the new numbers just came out for 2019, and they're now at 86%. So they saw a 22% jump, but they made a whole bunch of different changes at the same time. So they have different types of ways that you can return containers, including the bag drop program, including all retailers, and including the redemption centers. So they've really gone a long way. Commissioner Kapikoff, you're exactly right. The level of convenience, the style of redemption really makes a difference. And if you make it super, super convenient for people, that is one of the things that leads to a higher redemption rate, as well as increasing the deposit value from 5 cents to 10 cents. And separately, the international, there's about 50 programs in place all around the world. The international average on redemption rate is 82%, so it's quite a bit higher than we have here in California. And we have an entire website that's dedicated to data about this that goes location by location. Our website is bottlebill.org, but I also have a fact sheet that I can send to make available to all the commissioners that gives the redemption rates in all of the different places around the world.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Valle, and then Commissioner Lapis.
Nick, I think you were before me. Nick, go ahead.
Oh. All right. I wasn't. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Just a general statement. One of the key reasons why I applied to sit on this commission is what's happening to our climate, what's happening to the earth, and in general, the health and safety of my children, grandchildren going forward. And there was a time when recycling centers was the only place where you could go to recycle. And move fast forward now in Alameda County, every business in Alameda County is required to have recycling. Every restaurant in Alameda County is required to do composting or organics. It's a requirement by statute. I think that if we are really serious about reducing carbon emissions, increasing opportunities to recycle, whether it's a redemption center, curbside program, in the office, in the restaurant, wherever it is, every opportunity that we can do, that we can take to capture material, and then through progressive legislation like 793, require that those materials get reused and reintegrated into the system, makes sense. So there is no magic bullet. Curbside programs is not the answer. Recycling centers are not the answer. All of those things working in tandem, together, in concert with each other, that's the answer. So I think that one of the key elements of our commission is look at the big picture. Don't eliminate, if anything, include more and give more opportunities for the world and the people of California to recycle. That's one of the main reasons why I wanted to sit on this commission. I felt that I could make an impact. And so I'm looking for opportunities to hear from every single party and anybody who's got ideas about how we can do it better. I'm not interested in doing a checkoff list about eliminating things. I want to include more. But the realities are some of the stuff that we're picking up at the curbside is just not recyclable. But I really am not interested in eliminating opportunities for the general public to say, well, you know, some things work and some things don't. I think if we give them more choices and we give them better choices, then the better we are as commissioners to say that we left no stone unturned. We did everything possible to investigate and to research and then discuss, but not make decisions, but bring it forward for public debate and conversation. That's my comment.
Commissioner Valle, well said, well said. And I think, you know, our task to enhance all of our programs, expand the programs. But first things first, let's make sure that we're generating the best quality of material that we can, making sure that we have people that can buy it because of the quality. And then if we can add additional items down the line, let's do it. The recycling centers are a great vehicle. They help people get their deposits back, so it's not a tax. People like going to recycling centers, and they're a great way back in the olden day and in some areas, and we'll hear about it from the Oregon program, great fundraisers. It's a great way to get money back into the communities. But the curbside programs have always been an integral part in the program because there's some people that choose not to go to a redemption center. So we need to make sure all of them are strong, and I think we're going to get there through all of our work. Commissioner Lapis.
Yeah, first of all, I agree with those two comments in terms of none of these things being a silver bullet, and you know, the recycling centers complementing curbside and vice versa. I think it's actually always been very surprising to me how high the CRV buyback rates are. But from what I understand, every county, because I think we looked at it county by county, every single county has a higher CRV buyback than curbside. But the places that didn't have a lot of recycling center access had much lower overall CRV recycling rates. And so the two really do go together. I actually want to talk about something else though. On the list of recommendations, we had previously talked about the commingled rate for PET on the day that we had the focus on PET.
Yes.
I want to make sure we don't lose that thread. I think currently CalRecycle allows PET thermoforms in the commingle rate, and I believe we were recommending that they not do so because that leads to dirtier bales of PET.
I don't know if Mike Miller is still on. Because
yes, I have a kind of a hard stop at 3:40 though.
Okay.
I have an appointment to visit a senior care facility, and they're tough to get when you have relatives. So I don't want to miss it.
Okay. So with the commingled rate, I was going to bring up some of the slides from the bale study that CalRecycle had done back in, I think, 2016. And I think it referenced thermoforms as a contaminant in the PET bales. But the question is, are they included in the commingled percentage when you're doing?
I'm going to let Cameron, sorry, Chair Dunley, I'm going to let Cameron Swinko speak to that.
Yep.
This study was literally designed to establish what was in the bales for the purposes of CRV. Thermoforms are not a contaminant in our system. So currently now, depending upon what the processor does with them, whether they bale them separately or whether they include them in the PET bale, that's how we count them. So I'm going to let Cameron speak. He can tell you a little bit more details. Cameron, go.
Yeah, hey, hi, can you hear me? Am I good? Am I on?
Yeah.
Yes.
So just want to, so the thermoforms are included in the weight for our surveys. They do, in a sense, decrease the rates because of the heavier weight and a non-CRV item. We sometimes exclude them from our survey if the MRF can show that they do not include them in their bales. So if we see bales of thermoforms only, we will exclude those from our pool of the load. But in general, they are a PET item, so they can be included in the survey rate and the survey pool.
So our definition of commingled is very clear. It's basically a mix of CRV and non-CRV containers of the same material type. And so the only way that staff know is by looking and looking at the chasing arrows or whatever is printed on the container. So if it's PET number 1, it is counted in a commingled survey. And it's a container.
So a clamshell, is that a container?
It is, because it has a lid.
How about a PET tray?
That would probably not be included. That does kind of get into an issue of did it have a top or not. When we do our survey, we only pull full containers. So, I mean, a container that is not been ripped, not a partial container. So a tray would be a little bit on the trying to guess, did this have a top to it? Did it have a film on it instead? So that can be a little bit of a guess.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Lapis, did that help?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should still keep it as a recommendation and discuss it at the full committee level. It's something that I've heard raised by reclaimers in the past, and I know was raised on the presentation we had.
Okay. Kate, I see one public comment.
Yes, and there's actually 2 now. One was from John Cook at Niagara Bottling. Moving to only PET for bottles may not make containers more recyclable because other resins offer certain properties that benefit the product, such as providing light barriers, long shelf life, etc. You can add these to PET, but often you then make the container not recyclable in a clear PET recycling stream. And the second comment was from Doug Cobold with the CPSC. To follow up on Commissioner Don Levy's comments on a stewardship organization, CPSC is supportive of the idea of a stewardship organization, but only if it was governed by a board appointed by the governor and the legislature, not a board appointed by industry. This is without a doubt public money and needs to have tight controls over its use and management. And those have been published.
Okay. So if you could go back, or as it go forward one slide to the list of potential problems. So from the committee members, are there additional items that we want to look at further as potential problems? Okay.
So this is the list I was referring, adding commingled rate to.
Okay. Any other items we want to address? Okay. See none. Potential solutions. Any suggestions on number one, as far as dealer take back, grocers not being paid for their work? I think the potential solution on that is pay them their CRV. And right now, a handling fee, should they get paid the same handling fee that recycling centers get paid? Any thoughts on that? Okay, seeing none. Item 2 with convenient zones. I think Cal Recycle did a good job on the report as far as allowing them the ability to redefine the zones. I think that's a very good solution. Any suggestions on convenient zones other than allowing Cal Recycle to redefine the zones? Okay, seeing none. Lack of innovation, higher costs. The higher cost options, I think that goes back to the oversight committee, giving them either the oversight committee or Cal Recycle the ability to pay for programs in higher cost areas or higher cost solutions. Any other suggestions on that? Nope. Okay. Underserved areas in the recycling deserts. Definitely in the higher cost areas, and getting Cal Recycle the ability to pay for programs in those higher cost areas or the underserved areas. It's just a question of who makes the determination, Cal Recycle or some oversight committee. But with the underserved areas in the recycling deserts, I think an item that'll need to be addressed is a standard of service, X number of redemption opportunities per 1,000 people. So statewide average right now, we have one redemption center for approximately every 30,000 people. But we have other areas like the Bay Area where there's basically one recycling center for every 300,000 people. So maybe we talk about setting a service standard of one redemption opportunity per 5,000 people, 10,000 people. We don't have to come up with anything right now. I think as we hear from our friends with Oregon Beverage at the next meeting, they'll have some numbers that are pretty impressive on service levels. Overserved areas, I think possible solution was addressed with AB 54 report from Mindy McIntyre and from Susan Collins, adjusting the formulas and how areas are paid. I think a couple of these just come down to looking at the formula and how different areas get paid for service. As far as loss of quality in glass, wine and spirits. Any thoughts on wine and spirits for the program? Should they be included? Continue to do what they're, or continue to have them basically use the curbside programs for their recycling service?
I agree with consuming wine and spirits to make the meetings better. Sorry, kidding. They should definitely be added to the program.
Yeah,
unless they can demonstrate
wine,
they can get a high enough recycling rate without being added.
Yeah, interesting thing with the program, we're seeing wine in aluminum cans that are not redemption. So those are, they're starting to kind of infiltrate the program, and if the recycling center is not doing their inspection and they take a aluminum can with wine, they might be faced with a $1,000 fine. And I would just say with that, if there was an oversight committee, hopefully addressing enforcement, because there are some provisions within the statute and the regulation that are pretty rigid, where an unintentional infraction, as Commissioner Valle pointed out, could accumulate to a pretty significant penalty. There's been times, like Susan Collins had mentioned, a handling fee site makes a mistake and they lose their handling fees for the entire month. Pretty serious penalty. And I know of one instance where a company failed to submit a letter of authorization to cancel material, and it was a multi-million-dollar issue between Cal Recycle and the company, and there was no material effect on the fund at all. The only problem was the program operator failed to submit a letter on an annual basis, but because the regulation said if you don't do it, you don't get the CRV money, it turned into a pretty big dispute over something that was completely immaterial. So I think an oversight committee could help address some enforcement issues that are non-material to the program that would be helpful to a lot of operators, both redemption centers, handling fees, and curbside programs. So wine and spirits, including those in the program. Low redemption rates. Any thoughts on how we increase it? Do we set an 80% level? Those that meet it stay at a nickel. If they don't, they go up to a dime. If they don't get to 80% by a later date, do we increase it from a dime to 15 cents? And I'm just talking about containers under 24 cents or 24 ounce, because those over 24 ounces are worth a dime. So those that are currently at a dime would go to 20 cents. So any thoughts on how we would increase the deposit? I see a thumbs up from Nick. Okay. At the next meeting, I see Commissioner Kalpakoff, and at the next meeting, I'll draft up, what could be an option. Commissioner Kalpakoff.
There you go. I just put my cue in. No, I want to see what the effects. I mean, what the effects are if you do raise the deposit to 10 cents. I'm not against it either way. Will it work in California, right? I don't know if a nickel is going to move the needle on people who aren't currently using them to go back and use, a buyback center. And that goes back to my other comment on if there's a study out there that, we could see, it would be really helpful to make that decision.
Okay. Let's see if we can find some information on that, because I agree with you, it would be helpful. And then the last thing, the Beverage Container Fund has 4 different accounts. And Susan, if you're still on, there's a glass account, a plastic account, a bimetal account, and a penalty account. Susan, are you still on?
Yes, there are 5 accounts. There's the main account that everything moves through: plastic, bimetal, glass, penalty.
And I don't know if Mike Miller's still with us, but the purpose of the 5 different accounts: the penalty account receives money from penalties that can only be distributed through legislation. And then funds generated through contributions by the beverage manufacturers go into either the bimetal account, the plastic account, the glass account, or the general account. Is that correct?
Well, for the other accounts, for the glass, plastic, and bimetal accounts, it's funded by two different streams of revenue. One is the processing fee paid by the beverage manufacturers, and the other part, which is the largest part, is what we call the offset, which comes from the CRV account. So when a particular material type has a higher recycling rate, the beverage manufacturer gets to pay less, and the money comes out of the CRV fund in a larger amount. And then those monies in those particular accounts are used to pay the processing payments to the recycling centers and curbside programs. So the reason it was set up that way in the beginning, so that there was an accounting for everybody. Originally, the beverage manufacturers were paying more into the system, and so everybody wanted like a separate account for accounting. Was that helpful?
Is that system working? Is it something that can be simplified?
Oh, we can always simplify things, but it is working. It's just an accounting function, right? It's just another bucket of money that we have to keep up with. And I just wanted to make you guys aware that there was money being transferred out of the CRV going into those accounts to pay the processing payment.
Okay. Okay. But any additional funds coming out of any of the accounts at this point takes legislation to approve.
Correct. So the penalty account in particular, yes, you have to get legislation to approve it. And they generally don't approve things if it's another enforcement type activity. They usually do it for something else. So like the bimetal account has quite a bit of money in there. Our quarterly reports can show you those actual balances. And so that would take negotiations in the legislation, because the beverage manufacturers may have something to say about that.
Okay. And the penalty account, that receives penalty money from recycling centers. And if a grocery store wants to pay the $3,000 a month alternative participation fee.
Yeah.
Is that what we're calling it? An alternative participation?
We call it the in lieu fee, but it is an option to pay. Yes, pay a fee. $100 a day.
All right. So if you have, say, 60 stores in San Francisco that are paying that amount into the fund every month, is any of that money available to set up recycling programs in San Francisco?
I'm not the one that determines whether it's available or not, but I can tell you that that money for those fees is going into the big account, the CRV account. It does not go into the penalty account.
Oh, okay.
And remember, our budget, because I heard the discussion earlier, is completely set by the legislature based upon what we ask for. There is no statutory limit on it, but it is approved every year in the budget. So our budget for admin, and so the legislature basically is the one that decides how the expenditures to go from any and all funds.
Okay, helpful. All righty, as far as bottle bill problems and solutions, any additional items? Or Kate, you have 2 comments at 3:30.
Yes.
Public comments.
I have 3 comments now. So quickly, this was from Tim Shestak at the American Chemistry Council, agreeing. I agree with the comment made by Commissioner Valle that the committee should be looking at the big picture. I think this type of thinking should also apply to market development activities as well, including how innovative advanced recycling technologies can complement mechanical recycling efforts. I'd reiterate my previous comments that innovative advanced recycling technologies should be an option to repurpose materials, especially certain plastics, in order to create domestic end-use markets. Other states have adopted legislation to achieve this objective, and California should be taking a big picture approach in considering these types of technologies. Comment number 2 is from Gregory Herner at Carpenter Sievers. In reality, because of the 50s, the subject was aluminum cans for spirit and wine. The comment is, in reality, because of the 50 state lids Wine and spirits in cans pay into program but don't get redeemed. Allowing printing on side of can for CRV would remove this problem. And the last comments from Doug Cobold of CPSC, subject is deposit increases. If the intent is to just get the less recyclable containers, 3 through 7, more likely recycled, then increasing the deposit on those types of containers may be helpful. However, this will not encourage the manufacturers to choose more recyclable / valuable material types for their containers. Deposits do not affect the manufacturers, only the consumers. And that is all the comments at this time.
Okay. Alrighty. I'd like to move on to agenda item, where are we at here? 6, data review, data requests. Kate, by chance, do you have the data request information that I had asked for? Have the ability to bring it up? You sent it to me, but I didn't tell you that I wanted to bring it up today. Do you have that available?
I have it, and I just, because I've had my little speech prepared for the last 3 meetings, just to give an overview for the public for all the data requests so far. There was a data request from the July 31st meeting that are available on the August 21st public notice. That was a beverage container fact sheet from June 2019, biannual recycling rates for plastics 4 through 7, and a list of recycling centers in some specific counties. One outstanding data item was available on September 11th, but we didn't get to it, and that's what I'm going to show, the data on beverage container returns for different programs in selected 8 counties. So let me bring that up right now. I'm going to bring up your version where you added some stuff that hasn't been filled in yet, if that's okay, Jeff. Well, bear with me. Sorry, everyone. I'll do this first. This was the committee, and apologies, I will try to zoom in. The committee requested, oops, sorry. What are you seeing? Okay, there we go. The committee requested, I don't know what's happening. Okay. The committee requested beverage containers return from selected counties, which were grouped and selected Northern California counties and selected Southern and Central California counties. There were 8 of them. And this data was provided by DOR. And I have noted, Chair Dunleavy, that you requested further detail on the beverage container return data. If it could be broken down by material type and program type. We have not, I do not have that document. So if I'd like to formally make sure that gets in the notes today so we can get on that for you. But this, okay. Was this what you were referring to, this document?
Yeah, and I think I referred to it to Commissioner Bouchard's comment about convenience. And what I was trying to get the information on, and CalRecycle's provided it, is returns in areas with a lot of redemption centers compared to areas with very few. So if you can go to the left a little bit. Okay, so the areas with very few redemption locations, they looked at Alameda, Contra Costa, San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Clara County, population of roughly 6.4 million people. And then they looked at Southern and Central California with Kern County, Los Angeles County, Tulare County, 11.6 million in population. If you go, and they looked at the returns through redemption centers, curbside programs, and collection programs. But with column G, the containers returned per capita, it looks like it's showing that the returns in the area where there's more convenience is almost double in the underserved areas. So it's showing that the counties that have a lot of redemption centers, more material is getting redeemed. In the areas with fewer redemption centers, less material is getting redeemed, unless the people in Northern California are drinking more wine and spirits, than the people in Southern California drinking more beer and soda. But then if you look at the curbside containers in column I, it looks like there's a much heavier impact on the number of curbside containers in the underserved areas than in those areas that are served by a lot of redemption centers. So I think what this is helpful to show is when there's more redemption centers, you're going to redeem more containers and you're going to take the burden off the curbside programs. So if CalRecycle could do a breakdown by material type, I think what it'll show, and I think Commissioner Kalpikoff referenced it, that the biggest burden on the programs, the curbside programs, is glass. And I don't know if they have any way of identifying if it's wine and spirits, but I think Commissioner Kalpikoff, his experience knows that the biggest glass burden is the wine and spirits. So I think the purpose of this is showing that if there's more redemption centers, we're going to recover more material. There'll be a better balance between redemption centers and take the burden off the curbside programs. And if wine and spirits were included in the program, it would get more quality material to the recycling centers that would help them. And again, take some of the burden off of the curbside programs. I see a comment from Commissioner Bouchard.
Yeah, thank you. And to be clear, I'm not opposed to redemption centers. I just don't think that the talk of the big shift is going to be as effective as people seem to think it is. But to address this data, I think two things. One, you have to look at the strength and effectiveness of the curbside program. And I can't really comment on the strength and effectiveness of the curbside programs in Southern California, but the curbside programs in San Francisco Bay Area are pretty strong. So I think that's one factor. The other factor is you're not going to get redemption from the curbside programs because they're not whole bottles. By the time they're dumped and into the trucks and then dumped from the trucks into the MRFs, they're broken. So you're not getting the redemption, but that doesn't mean the material is not being recovered. Thank you.
Okay, good points. Any other comments or questions from committee members? Or any additional data that we would like CalRecycle to provide? We'll definitely look for some studies on redemption centers and participation levels in the communities, because I think that's going to be helpful as well. Any other items that we'd like to get from CalRecycle? Okay, seeing none. Kate, if you could switch back to my slides. Talk about the proposed meetings coming up. Thank you for the participation in helping schedule the future meetings. I think we're on the last slide. Our next meeting, we'll have it on October 9th, 1 to 3. We'll be talking to people from TOMRA and Oregon Beverage Recycling Corporation, integral partners up there with their program. So we'll hear about bag drop, RVMs, dealer participation, using more technology in the programs, and the effects of going from 5-cent to a 10-cent deposit. We can continue the discussion on bottle bill problems and solutions, and we will bring up the plastic policy discussion, the design for recyclability. Then October 23rd, hopefully we can finalize the design for recyclability, the plastic policy discussion, to see if we can move that up to the entire commission and continue talking about the bottle bill. November 6th, we will have Martin Bork from the Berkeley Ecology Center to talk about the Basel Amendment. And then are there other items or stakeholders we'd like to bring in? I know several that have submitted comments. I will see how we can schedule those in the future, but are there other stakeholders we'd like to invite to this committee to hear from? Commissioner Lapis.
Yeah, I'd like to delve a little bit more into the thermoform issue. So if maybe we can have somebody from Our Planet, for example. I think their letter was interesting, so I recommend reading that.
Okay, let me reach out to them and see when we can get them in, because that is an item that has been talked about both from the reclaimers and people from PRCC, so it would be good to hear from them. Any other people that we'd like to invite in? Okay, seeing none. So that's the schedule for the upcoming meetings. Definitely an active discussion today. I think our first milestone was met by finalizing the recommended list that we could move up to the entire commission with Chair Sanborn. So the entire commission will have a chance to review it and comment and see if there's adjustments that we need to make to it before we make the final recommendation. Then very active discussion on bottle bill problems and solutions with Susan Collins and the rest of the committee. As we keep moving forward in the next few meetings, we'll try and get away from the detail and identify some higher level policy recommendations that might provide some solutions to the legislature to solve what seems like a laundry list of issues that need to be addressed in the bottle bill. Commissioner Kalpikoff.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any way that we could get a copy of the presentations prior to the meeting? It seems like I'm going through them for the first time when we sit down here. I mean, are they posted? I'm just missing it, or can you answer that first?
I can actually. This is we were going to soon probably send out a message to all the committees, but we've conferred with legal. You can share presentations or documents that will be talked about at the agenda with each other before. And when I say with each other, like email them, but no conversation outside of a committee meeting. So we have found out that that is something that you can do. So Chair Don Levy, feel free to shoot a presentation to the rest of your committee beforehand. I'm also, I can share, but you guys don't have to send me anything if you don't want to. But again, we can send on email some more details, but I know this will work better, and there was some desire to see these documents beforehand. Also, anything shared on the screen is then considered kind of in the public domain. So I am, when people request it, I can send it to them, even if it is not ADA accessible. We can only post ADA accessible things on the public notice, hence why you notice it looks a little sparse perhaps sometimes. So, but yeah.
Thank you, Kate. I appreciate it. And then my last comment is that it seems like we can make public comment now or we can comment on public comment at the meetings. Is there a desire to have a little bit of interaction with the public? There was a couple of comments that the tone today was that they weren't getting heard or responded to, and I know, well, I don't know if we're allowed to do it or not. I heard that we probably can, maybe we can, but I don't know. So I'll leave it up to the chair.
I would just look to advice from staff. At this point, can we comment?
I would refer back to Bagley-Keene, honestly, and I can send out a version of that again. I'm not legal counsel, so I want to avoid any conflicts. I believe previously from my interpretation, you could comment on things in the agenda item, but again, I'd refer back to the Bagley-Keene guide, and I can send that out again for specific language.
Okay, and then what I'll do is Kate, I'll get with you and see if we can list out all the public comments that have come in and see the appropriate way to address those, communicating back with the person that commented or the organization to see if it helps answer their questions or addresses their concern.
And Jeff, could you also talk with Heidi so that the overall commission and the subcommittees are all following the same process? Because I think that was a discussion there too, just to make sure that the overall commission doesn't make a different decision than the subcommittee, or the subcommittee makes a different decision than the overall commission, just so that we understand what it looks like.
Okay, I can reach out to Commissioner Sanborn on that. All right, any other comments? All right, seeing none, we finished a little bit early on this wonderful Friday. We finally got blue skies for a whole week in Northern California, which has been very enjoyable. So thank you everybody for your participation and your input. Have a very good, safe, enjoyable weekend, and hopefully you grab your favorite beverage and put it in a curbside program for Mr. Bouchard, or bring it to a buyback center. Either way, California succeeds. All right, thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Jeff.